Sheet pan dinners are so great because you just need to chop up a few vegetables, dump them on a baking tray, add a can of legumes and some seasonings, and then pop it into the oven for about 30 minutes, and then you just need to add some hummus or a sauce and your meal is done. In this video I will show you 3 different sheet pan meals which are all plant-based. They are all easy but will increase a little bit in effort as we go through the video. I will include the full recipes in the description box and they all make 2 servings, but you can of course make extra. I love making these when I don't feel like cooking or don't know what to make because they're just that easy. The first one only has 4 main ingredients: potatoes, carrots, cauliflower, and chickpeas. Starting off, I washed and diced some potatoes. I keep the skin on because I think it tastes better that way, and the skin also has nutrients and fiber. I used 3 potatoes for this, but how many you use will depend on the size. This was about 430 grams of raw potato, just for reference. So cut them into cubes like I'm doing here. If your potatoes are much smaller, you can just cut them in half and then add them to the tray. For the carrots, you can keep the skin on if you want. I like to peel them. And I used 2 medium to large carrots for 2 servings. And if they're thick, I slice them in half before I cut them into smaller pieces. You want them to be about the same size as the potato cubes. For the next step, you can use fresh cauliflower, but I honestly just use frozen because this is a lazy meal for me, and if you use frozen ones, you just have to get them out of the bag. So I did that, and then I drained and rinsed a can of chickpeas and added that as well. For the spices, I simply used salt, pepper, paprika, and dried oregano. You could add ground cumin or curry powder if you like. I think that would fit very well, but I made it simple, so yeah, only used like 4 spices. I chose not to add any oil to this, but if you want to, I would recommend you to add avocado oil. Before you put it into the oven, you want to mix everything really well so everything gets coated in the seasoning. And lastly, you want to spread everything out so it will cook evenly. Then you want to roast it in the oven at 200 degrees Celsius for about 30 to 35 minutes. I will write the Fahrenheit degrees in the recipe just so you know. Ideally, you want to take the tray out halfway and stir it around a bit, but I'm usually too lazy to do that, so yeah. I like to add hummus to this. If you want more like a thinner sauce, you can mix hummus with some plant milk and perhaps even nutritional yeast for a cheesy flavor, or any other spice really, and make a sauce out of it. You can also make a tahini sauce, and I will show you a tahini sauce in the last recipe, so stay tuned for that. I think it's nice to add sauerkraut as well. You could also add leafy greens on the side if you want to. The second recipe is a little bit more Mediterranean, I guess. It has potatoes, zucchini, bell pepper, red onion, garlic, and beans. So again, I started by cutting potatoes into cubes. These ones were smaller, so I used 4, about 250 grams total. You can use sweet potatoes instead if you would prefer that. Then you want to cut up 1 zucchini into half-moon slices, and you don't want them to be too thin but not too thick either. Then you want to cut up 1 red bell pepper. I cut them into thick slices lengthwise and then ones in the middle of those slices. Then cut the red onion into 4 wedges. I used a small one, but if you have a bigger one, you could potentially cut it into 8 wedges. And I placed each wedge kind of randomly on the tray. I don't want to separate them because then there's a risk that the onion will burn. Then you want to cut 2 garlic cloves in half, and once everything is done cooking, you can either remove them or mash them and incorporate them into the dish for more flavor. For this dish, I like to add kidney beans or a bean mix, and this time I used a bean mix with kidney beans, butter beans, and chickpeas. For the spices, I used salt, pepper, dried oregano, basil, and rosemary. I didn't add any oil to this either, but as I said before, you can add avocado oil if you want. And again, you want to stir everything around so it gets coated in the seasonings, and then spread everything out as evenly as possible on the tray before roasting it in the oven at 200 degrees Celsius for about 30 to 35 minutes. This time I wasn't too lazy to stir it around halfway, but it's more important for this dish, I think, just to distribute the garlic flavor. I like to add hummus to this as well, but you can add a sauce if you would rather want to do that. You can also add leafy greens or lettuce or whatever if you want. I decided to add some romaine lettuce. I also like to make this without the potatoes and eating it with buckwheat instead. There's just something about the combination of buckwheat and hummus and roasted vegetables that is so delicious. The third recipe requires slightly more effort because we are not adding all vegetables to the tray at once. Some of them we add halfway through. And we are also making a tahini dressing, which I highly recommend you to make with this because it pairs very well with this dish. Like the 2 previous meals, it contains potatoes, but it also contains red onion, asparagus, artichokes, and butter beans. So it's full of prebiotic fiber. And again, you want to cut 3 to 4 potatoes into cubes, about 300 grams. Then I cut half of a medium-sized red onion into large wedges. This time I actually separated them, but you just want to make sure as it cooks that it doesn't burn. I added salt, pepper, and fresh chives to that. Well, actually I added frozen chives, but they're fresh but frozen, if you know what I mean. They're not dried. I I actually decided to add avocado oil to this one because I feel like it's kind of necessary for this one. As usual, you want to combine everything before placing it in the oven at 200 degrees Celsius. You want that to bake for 15 minutes before adding the rest to the tray, so during that time you can prepare the rest. I really should have used a bigger bowl, but you want to add about 10 spears of asparagus. I use frozen because they are parboiled. At least I think that's the correct English term. But yeah, they cook quicker than fresh asparagus. Next, open a can of artichoke hearts and remove the brine. Then cut them in half before adding them to the bowl of asparagus. And lastly, season it with salt and pepper. And try to combine everything as much as possible. Hopefully you are using a bigger bowl and it's much easier for you. When 15 minutes have passed, take out the tray and add the asparagus and artichokes. You also want to add a can of drained and rinsed butter beans at this point. This is optional, but after combining everything, you can also add a few lemon slices. Then add it back into the oven for 15 to 20 more minutes. While that's in there, you are going to make the dressing. The recipe for the dressing will also be in the description box. So into a bowl, first add 1 tablespoon of lemon juice and 2 tablespoons of tahini. Then add salt and onion and garlic powder. If you want to make a sauce for the first 2 recipes, I would not add dried dill, but the dill really makes the dressing for this 3rd recipe, so definitely add it. You also want to add a sweetener. If you're not strictly vegan, you can add honey, but if you are vegan, of course use something like maple syrup instead. I know some vegetarians eat honey, but yeah, choose whatever suits your dietary preference. I'm not vegan, by the way, I just eat plant-based for the most part. Anyways, you just want to whisk everything together and add some water little by little to thin out the sauce. This dressing is absolutely delicious and you can use it for salads or bowls as well. If you want to make this for the first recipe, for instance, adding curry powder instead of dill could be really nice. This recipe is actually my favorite flavor-wise out of the 3, so it's definitely worth the extra effort. And as I said before, it's also full of prebiotic fiber, which is good for your gut microbiome. If you did add lemon slices, you can remove them from the tray and just add a slice or 2 to each plate and squeeze some lemon juice on top before eating. Just looking at this footage makes me crave this again. It's absolutely delicious, as I already said, and you really have to try it. I promise you won't be disappointed. Let me know in the comments if you try any of these. Nonetheless, I hope you enjoyed this video and found some inspiration. If you did, don't forget to leave a like and also subscribe so you don't miss my next video.